You've built your life around yourself, your memories, your roles, your inner voice. But what if that you is the greatest illusion? Carl Jung called it the ego, necessary for waking up to the world. The Buddha proclaimed anātman, no self, as the doorway to liberation. So who's right? Is the self a real foundation, or the very structure we must dismantle? I'm silent flame. And today, we ignite the tension between Jung's individuation and the Buddha's emptiness. Can you embrace a self, while also knowing there is none? Defining the self in Jungian psychology. In Jungian theory, the self is the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, an integrating center guiding individuation. Key Jungian concepts: ego, the conscious I, responsible for identity and daily navigation; personal unconscious, forgotten memories, complexes, repressed material; collective unconscious, archetypes shared across humanity: mother, shadow, anima, animus; self archetype, the regulating center uniting opposites, symbolized by mandalas. Ego versus self. The ego is the narrow self you present to the world. The self is the largest psychic totality that you must become aware of through individuation. Why individuation matters. Healing fragmentation by integrating shadow aspects. Realizing purpose through archetypal encounters. Achieving psychological wholeness. Becoming what you are. In early Buddhism, the Buddha rejected any permanent, unchanging self. He taught 5 aggregates, a skandha, that arise and pass: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. The 5 skandhas: rupa, form body; vedana, sensations, feelings; samjñā, perceptions, labels; samskara, intentional formations; vijñāna, awareness, consciousness; anātman, insight. There is no unchanging essence behind these aggregates, only processes. Clinging to an I causes suffering. No self versus no ego. The Buddha dismantled the idea of a permanent passenger in the mind, not the functional processes that Jung describes. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is the hidden side of the psyche, the parts we repress, deny, or project onto others. It's composed of our inferior functions, unacknowledged desires, and the wounds we refuse to heal. Key facets of the shadow: projection. We see in others the traits we refuse to own in ourselves. Anger, greed, fear, repression. Unwanted impulses are banished to the unconscious, gathering psychic energy and influence and behavior beneath awareness. Integration. Jung's path of individuation demands we acknowledge, accept, and transform the shadow, weaving its contents into a more whole self. Shadow versus ego. The ego fears the shadow, because integrating shadow elements shatters the neat self-image it has constructed. Yet only by embracing the shadow can the self, Jung's archetypal center, emerge in balance. Jung's practice of shadow work, active imagination, dialogue with inner figures, allowing shadow aspects to speak. Dream analysis, interpreting symbols that reveal repressed content. Creative expression, art, writing, movement, as channels for unconscious material. The goal is not to eliminate darkness, but to bring it into the light of conscious awareness, so the psyche can reclaim its lost vitality. In Buddhist traditions, we don't speak of a shadow archetype, but the practice of facing one's defilements, greed, lobha, hatred, dosa, delusion, moha, serve a similar function. The dark night of the soul appears when deep practice uproots our attachments, exposing raw emotional currents. Core elements of Buddhist shadow confrontation: mental hindrances, lust, ill will, sloth, torpor, restlessness, worry, doubt. barriers that arise meditatively, demanding our investigation. Maranasati, mindfulness of death, reflecting on impermanence to dissolve fear of loss and mortality. Upakilesa, defilements, observing greed, envy, jealousy as transient phenomena to be seen, not acted upon. Dark night versus shadow work, where Jung invites us to dialogue with unconscious figures. Buddhism invites us to sit with discomfort, to watch the mind's tremors without aversion or identification. Methods of Buddhist confrontation. Vipassana. Insight. Noting practice. Rising, falling, craving, aversion, revealing the cyclical nature of afflictions. Mahamudra. Dzogchen. Pointing out. Direct recognition of mind's luminous ground. Dissolving duality between defilement and purity. Lojong. Mind training. Tonglen practice. Breathing in others' suffering. Breathing out compassion. Transforming aversion into love. Buddhism doesn't reject the darkness. It uses it as the mirror that reveals the emptiness of all phenomena, ourselves included. In Jungian psychology, individuation is the sacred arc of transformation, the process by which the fractured ego gradually surrenders its illusions and awakens to the full spectrum of the self archetype. From persona to authenticity. The persona, the social mask we present to the world, crafted from expectations, roles, and aspirations. Individuation begins when that mask no longer fits, when life's dissonance shatters the false image and beckons us toward deeper authenticity. Who am I beneath these roles, Jung asks us. The journey inward seeks to answer that. Encounter with the shadow. As we integrate our repressed instincts, the shadow's raw energies flood consciousness. Rather than vilify these impulses, individuation demands an embrace. Anger reveals our fire. Greed reveals our hunger. Fear reveals our need for ground. Each integration restores psychic balance, weaving lost fragments into a larger tapestry of wholeness. Archetypal illumination. As shadow gives way to dialogue, archetypes emerge. The wise old man, the great mother, the trickster, all universal images residing in the collective unconscious. These figures guide the seeker through symbolic landscapes, dream mandalas, mythic journeys, visionary epiphanies. Through active imagination and creative engagement, the ego yields space for the self's radiance to shine. The paradox of Jungian wholeness. In seeking the self, individuation expands identity, but it never claims to burst the boundaries of selfhood. The self remains an organizing center, a dynamic totality that holds ego and unconscious in dialogue, forever renewing harmony. Buddhism's radical departure lies in the teaching of anātman, no self, which dissolves even the self-archetype as a permanent entity. Here, each sense of self is seen as a transient process, not a fixed center. Skandhar stream and the illusion of continuity. We revisit the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, as ceaseless streams of phenomena. Each moment of experience interweaves these aggregates, giving rise to the illusion of a continuous self. Insight practice, vipassana, reveals that no splice of these streams can be grasped as I or mine. Transcending ego and archetype. Where Jung's self arises from integration of opposites, Buddhism invites us to witness all opposites dissolve in emptiness. Shunyata. The wise old man becomes a fleeting image, the great mother an echo. Even the sacred mandala fades without clinging. The ultimate archetype, Buddha nature, appears as intrinsic luminosity, not a self, Recognizing it means recognizing that all phenomena, including nature's, lack inherent self-nature. The paradox of non-self realization. Enlightenment is not the building of a grand self, but the complete letting go of any self-construction. The Pali Suttas describe stream entry. The first glimpse of anātman shatters the eye. Yet it is not emptiness as void, but emptiness as infinite openness. Post-awakening, there is no individual to claim realization, only the flow of compassion and wisdom. Bridging Jung and Buddhism. Jung saw the self as a goal of psychic integration. The Buddha saw non-self as the liberation of integration altogether. One expands the ego's horizon, the other bursts the horizon itself. In Jungian psychology, we engage the unconscious through active imagination, dialoguing with inner figures, painting mandalas of dream imagery, and writing down conversations with aspects of the psyche. These methods honor the wounded self, inviting the fragmented parts to the banquet of consciousness. Active imagination. Expanded. You sit quietly, close your eyes, and invite the image of the shadow's archetype, perhaps a hooded figure or a wounded child, to speak. You ask, "What do you need? What message do you carry?" The dialogue may reveal subconscious fears of abandonment, buried anger at authority, or unfulfilled creative urges. By writing these words in a journal, you externalize the unconscious, giving it form, and thus begin to integrate its energy into your conscious life. Dream work and symbolic elucidation. Every night, the psyche paints allegories across your REM theatre. A crumbling house may signify collapsing persona, a monstrous dog, repressed aggression. You record these dreams immediately, then map symbols to personal associations, some universal, archetypes, some uniquely yours. Over months, patterns emerge. A recurring river may indicate emotional flux. A labyrinth, the complexity of self-inquiry. Creative expression as alchemy painting, sculpting, movement. Create a shadow box filled with objects representing disowned qualities. Broken mirrors for self-image, black fabric for grief. Dance the anger, sculpt the fear, collaging images of your hidden longing. Through these acts, repressed energies transmute, like lead into gold, revealing latent capacities for creativity, resilience, and empathy. The integrative mandala. Jung encouraged creating mandalas, circular, symmetrical images, as symbolic scaffolds of the emerging self. Each mandala becomes a microcosm, reflecting the inner unity of opposites. Buddhism does not seek to integrate the self. It aims to dissolve the very substrate of selfhood through direct insight. Here, the practice is not creative expression, but radical undifferentiation of observer and observed. Vipassana insight meditation. You settle into stillness, noting each arising thought, thinking, and each bodily sensation, feeling. Labeling unfolds, seeing, hearing, wanting, resisting. Each phenomenon is observed, then released without narrative. Over time, the seamless flow of labels reveals there is no hidden I behind the process, only the play of phenomena. Mahamudra and Dzogchen, pointing out, a master may instruct, rest naturally in awareness, do not chase thoughts, do not suppress them, abide in the space in which thoughts appear and disappear. You learn to glimpse Rigpa, naked, luminous awareness, beyond all content. This pointing out can precipitate a glimpse of non-dual mind, shattering the sense of a separate observer. Lojong practices, Tonglen and mind training. In Tonglen, you visualize inhaling the suffering of others as dark smoke, then exhaling healing light. The boundary between self and other dissolves. Your compassion becomes a river flowing through all life. Mind training slogans. Drive all blames into one. Be grateful to everyone. Reorient habitual reactions. Undermining the ego's self-protective narratives. Koan contemplation. Zen practitioners wrestle with paradoxical questions. What is the sound of one hand clapping? The koan bypasses discursive thought, forcing the mind beyond logic into direct realization of non-duality. When the koan's riddle finally answers itself, the sense of self-other duality collapses. The paradox of practice. Jungian methods build a bridge between ego and unconscious. Buddhist methods swallow the bridge altogether, revealing the river of awareness without banks. Jung's crisis of meaning. Jung described the midlife crisis as a confrontation with meaninglessness. When the persona fractures, when roles fail, relationships falter, achievements feel hollow, the ego is forced to ask, what gives my life purpose? Symptoms of meaning, crisis, existential ennui, the sense that daily routines no longer satisfy, mornings feel empty, role dissolution, loss of career, end of relationships, or retirement trigger identity confusion, spiritual desolation. Traditional beliefs lose power, leaving an emotional void. Shadows roll in crisis. Repressed desires break through as turmoil. Sudden anger, self-sabotage, depressive episodes. Dreams become vivid with symbols of death, decay, or abandonment. The unconscious demanding integration. Jungian response crisis becomes the alchemical fire. By consciously confronting meaninglessness, the psyche seeks a deeper ground, the self-archetype. Individuals embark on creative quests, mentorship, or explorations of myth and folklore, hunting for a renewed sense of purpose. Jung believed that without this painful rupture, the self could never emerge. The ego must smash its confines to expand. Buddha's crisis of self, Sankara crisis. In Buddhism, life's crises are seen as pivotal moments when Sankaras, mental formations, collide, and one is forced to question the solidity of I. Symptoms of Sankara crisis, acute dukkha. An unshakable grief or anxiety emerges without clear cause. Identity dissolution. Roles and relationships feel dreamlike. Past accomplishments seem insignificant. Spiritual despair. Loving-kindness practices and traditional rituals lose their comforting force. Defilements exposed. Under intense meditation or trauma, greed, hatred, and delusion surge, revealing their deep roots. The mind's habitual narratives. I must achieve. I must be loved. I must be safe. Collapse under scrutiny. Buddhist response. Turning mindfulness inward. Instead of seeking new meaning externally, one investigates moment-by-moment experience, letting go of clinging, observing the death of identities, father, provider, believer, as impermanent roles. Glimpse of emptiness. In the stillness after crisis, a direct taste of non-self may arise, uniting anguish and liberation. The Buddha taught that crises aren't malfunctions, but opportunities. They shatter illusion so insight can dawn. Pitfalls of shadow integration, over-identification. The ego may co-opt the shadow, reinforcing I've integrated my darkness, pride, creating a spiritual ego. Endless digging. Obsessive analysis can trap one in the labyrinth of the unconscious, producing paralysis rather than growth. Moralizing the shadow. Judging repressed traits as bad can replicate repression rather than true acceptance. Dangers of radical dissolution. Fragmentation. Early glimpses of non-self may disorient, leading to derealization or depersonalization if unsupported. spiritual bypass, using emptiness teachings to avoid real-world responsibilities, social bonds, or ethical engagement. Attachment to non-self. Ironically, some cling to the idea of no self as a new identity, reifying the very construct meant to be transcended, synthesizing a safe path, balanced dialogue, combined conscious engagement, Jungian integration with mindful release, Buddhist witnessing, guidance and community, seek mentors, therapists, Sankara members, avoid solo ventures into deep psyche or emptiness. Gradual practice, alternate active imagination days with silent retreats, weave shadow exploration with meta cultivation. Checkpoints, regularly assess mental health, consult professionals if dissociation intensifies. True transformation honors both depth and grounding. We neither bury shadows nor dissolve entirely. We learn to live fluidly between form and formlessness. Rather than offer exercises, let's look at the lives of 3 seekers whose journeys reveal the core tension between Jung's self and the Buddha's no-self. Stories rich in insight, free from prescriptive practice. The analyst who met emptiness, Dr. Eleanor, a seasoned Jungian psychotherapist, spent decades guiding clients through shadow integration. She embraced every archetype, hero, priestess, sage, but still felt an unnameable restlessness at her core. On a silent retreat, in the hush of dawn, she experienced a sudden collapse of self. Every inner figure she'd cultivated vanished into a boundless clarity. Inside, she realized that Jungian wholeness and Buddhist emptiness are not mutually exclusive, but successive phases. First integrating fragments of psyche, then releasing even that integrated I into openness. Transformation. Returning to her practice, she no longer sought to heal a fixed ego, but to accompany clients as they observed all identities arise and pass, honoring both the story and the space beyond story. The monk-turned-artist Tashi grew up in a Tibetan monastery, mastering ritual, mantra, and the cultivation of bodhicitta. Later, he left the robes to become a painter. His canvases first depicted intricate mandalas, Jungian in their archetypal symmetry. Yet over time, his style shifted. Vast washes of empty color, forms dissolving into nothingness. Insight. He came to see mandalas as maps of self and empty fields as maps of no self. Both held truth. The egoic pattern guides the seeker to the doorway. Emptiness welcomes the step beyond. Transformation. Tashi's exhibitions now pair mandalas with void paintings side by side, inviting viewers to feel the tension between form and formlessness, between integration and release. The lay teacher and the unspoken center Amara, a Western lay meditation teacher, trained in secular mindfulness and Jungian dream work. She found that her students often clung to self-improvement goals even in meditation. Better focus, less stress, more confidence. She realized that both psychological integration and mindfulness can reinforce a subtle I. Insight. Amara coined a phrase, the unspoken center. It describes the moment when both therapist and meditator recognize that the centerpiece of change is neither ego nor empty void, but the dynamic space in which both appear. Transformation. Her talks now invite participants not to add new insights or to chase emptiness, but simply to notice the dance of emergence and disappearance. The living process that neither builds nor destroys the self. Integration and dissolution are stages, not opposites. Jungian work stitches together fragments. Buddhist insight loosens the weave, both essential. No practice method is absolute. Whether through dialogue with the unconscious or silent watching, the goal remains the same: freedom from fixation. The I and no I co-arise. Even the realization of no self emerges within the field of self. Recognizing that interplay is itself the deepest wisdom, we've traversed 2 continents of the psyche: Jung's map of the self, woven from archetypes and the shadow, and the Buddha's terrain of anātman, where even the self dissolves into emptiness. Now, let us weave these seemingly divergent threads into a single tapestry of understanding. The nature of identity, construct and deconstruction, constructing the self. Jung showed us that the self archetype functions as the unifying center, an emergent property of conscious and unconscious working in concert. It gives coherence to our life narrative, a beacon guiding individuation. This constructed self arises through relational patterns, parental influences, cultural mores, personal myths that crystallize into an I we call home. Deconstructing the self. The Buddha taught that this I is a transient mirage. Through insight, we see the 5 aggregates arise interdependently, lacking any unchanging core. Deconstruction does not negate experience. It reveals that the apparent center is no more solid than a wave on an ocean. The paradox: the self must be constructed before it can be deconstructed. One builds the house before one realizes it is made of smoke. The shadow as gateway to no self-shadow. Integration fuels dissolution. By facing our repressed impulses, we loosen identification with any fixed persona. Acknowledging anger, shame, or envy erodes the I am this stance. Each integrated shadow trait becomes raw material for insight. Anger reveals energy. Shame reveals vulnerability. Envy reveals longing, all ripe for mindful observation. Mindful witnessing completes the cycle. Observing these formerly hidden aspects as passing phenomena. Anger arises, anger fades. We learn to hold form and formlessness together. The very process of shadow work, when paired with insight, becomes a bridge to anātman. The shadow reveals the self. Insight releases it. The shadow whispers, "You are more than you know." Emptiness roars back, "You are none of what you think." In that space, freedom is born. Healthy I after no self, reframing ego strength. A healthy ego, for Jung, is flexible, capable of welcoming unconscious material and adapting to life's demands without fragmentation. After insight into no self, the ego is not obliterated, but liberated from paranoia and rigidity. It functions as a transparent mirror, reflecting change without clinging. Compassionate self-transcendence. The Buddhist ideal of awakened activity shows a self who acts compassionately, yet does not identify with action. Helping is what's happening, without an agent behind it. This model preserves agency. Compassion arises, while dissolving the chimera of a permanent doer. A self-aware ego becomes a servant of spaciousness, a steward of awareness, rather than a fortress to defend. Bridging worlds. The dialogue continues, dialectic of form and formlessness. Jung's psychology provides tools to uncover personal history, heal wounds, and build resilience. Buddhism offers radical freedom from all fixed forms. Together, they form a dialectic: build, integration, then unbuild, dissolution. The cycle repeats, deepening maturity and insight. The middle path of psyche. Neither total identification with the ego nor total annihilation of the ego yields balance. The middle way invites a fluid self, rooted enough to function, open enough to dissolve when needed. Practically, this means living with a coherent life narrative while remembering its provisional nature. We don't choose between self and no self. We navigate the river between them, discovering that the water itself is both form and formless. You have seen the self as a beacon, a center of meaning, a haven of integration. You have touched no self as a void, boundless, weightless, free of form. Now, listen to the silence that neither builds nor dissolves. In that silence, the self and no self meet, like two lovers in a dark room, feeling each other's breath. Neither claims victory, neither demands allegiance. They simply are, coexisting, interwoven, inseparable. This is the living paradox. A self that dances with emptiness, a no self that pulses with presence. You need not choose one over the other. You need not practice more, nor study deeper. You need only rest in the space where both arise, the field where identity blooms and fades in the same instant. In that field, your being is whole. You are wave and ocean, form and formlessness, story and silence. And in that unity, you touch the mystery that no map can chart. I am silent flame, and I invite you, sit in that space tonight. Let questions echo into quiet. See how the flame of self burns without consuming, and how the light of no self illuminates without revealing. If this silence speaks to something real in you, let it be your final teacher, beyond words, beyond selves, beyond all that can be grasped.